Okay, I must admit I'm a little bored today, so I've just decided I would watch some of Frank Turek's videos. It's been a while since I've critiqued Frank Turek, so I'm on his website here and on YouTube, his YouTube channel, and I'm just going to look at some question and answers. They're short ones, and see what happens here.
All right, good stuff. Let me go. Does someone have a question over here? Oh, no. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Hi, my name is Robin.
Hey, Robin.
My question is, by which standard would God judge people who lived before the time of Christ? For example, they didn't get a chance to know Christ and put their faith in him.
Yes.
Oh, this is a great question. A lot of Christians struggle with this question. What about people who honestly, truly don't know Jesus? Never heard the good news, whether today or 5,000 years ago. What happens to those people when they die?
Excellent question for those that lived before Christ. I think the Bible answers that for us, where Paul talks about the gospel was preached to Abraham, and that Abraham his faith was credited to him as righteousness. They just trusted in Yahweh. They knew there was a Savior coming. They didn't know his name, but by trusting in Yahweh, they would be saved.
Trusting in Yahweh, they will be saved. They didn't know Jesus' name. So it's not by the name of Jesus you're saved, or the belief in the name of Jesus, or the belief that you know anything about Jesus. You can still go to heaven without belief in a guy named Jesus. It's trusting in Yahweh.
So it's retroactive for people who came before Christ. Christ's salvation applies to them even though it hadn't happened chronologically in our world yet.
So basically he's saying that Jesus paved the way. Jesus was the road builder that leads to heaven. But you don't have to know who that road builder is if you live before the time of Jesus. You just travel on that road without knowing, oh, Jesus made this road for me.
And what about the non-Jews, people who didn't know of Yahweh either?
Well, we don't know much about them, but we do know there was a mysterious priest called Melchizedek. And if you go to Genesis 14, you can read about Melchizedek. Melchizedek seems to come out of nowhere, and Abraham sacrifices, and Melchizedek blesses him. We don't know if God's word had gone out to other people at that point, and we don't have a record of it. Or it could be that people in those days just put their faith in some sort of creator and didn't know the name and were saved that way.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. They were saved that way. They just pictured a creator, a nebulous creator, or maybe even a creator with a different name other than Yahweh, and they were saved that way. Christians, you got to be very careful when a guy like me asks you, who goes to heaven? Or how do you become saved? Because Frank's here admitting that you don't need Jesus. Well, you need Jesus, but you don't need to know of Jesus to go to heaven. He just admitted that Abraham didn't know of Jesus specifically and went to heaven. And now he's talking about people who might not even know Yahweh who go to heaven.
We know the bottom line is this, and since God is the standard of justice, nobody in the afterlife is going to be treated unfairly.
Yes. This is why Calvinists exist. If God is the standard of justice, then who cares? You know, who cares who goes to heaven or not? Because God is just. He will sort it out. So that's not your concern. It's not your worry. You don't have to know the details. You just trust that God is going to sort it out okay. He is the definition of love. He is the definition of just. So no matter how unjust it seems, no matter how unloving it may seem, you're just wrong, because the definition of love and justice is Yahweh, is Jesus.
Right? He is the very standard of justice.
Thank you.
Thanks, Robin.
Okay, that's the end of the first one. I'm going to find another one here. Actually, I want to first see, make sure I'm live streaming. Make sure there's some people watching. If you were to make a bet, like let's say when Frank Turek was a baby. When Frank Turek was a baby, and if you had to place a bet, let's say I told you Frank Turek someday is going to be an apologist or a believer, and you had to place a bet. What religion will he be? All you know is where he was born. Wouldn't you bet a big chunk of money that that he would be a Christian and a Christian apologist? In other words, long before Frank, when Frank was a baby, long before he even knew any of these arguments, any of these reasons to believe, you could bet with probably 70 to 80% certainty or confidence that he's would be the type of guy he is today. Yes, we are going. Welcome, Rachel, Dan, Joy. So let's see what else I can find here. Oh,
yes, sir. What's your name?
Here's a good one. Why did God create the devil?
All right, let's get a couple more before we go to lunch. Yes, sir. What's your name?
Joshua.
Joshua, go ahead, sir.
So I had a discussion recently with my friends about God, and they asked me a question: why is it that
Welcome.
God? Why did He create the devil? Why is that? My answer was, you can't have free will. There has to be a choice if you have free will. Is that a good enough answer?
I think it is, and there's not actually a lot in the Bible about Satan, believe it or not, in terms of his creation. We don't really learn about the angel split until Revelation chapter 13, right, where a third of the angels go with Satan and the other two-thirds stay with God.
So
but yes, he creates these angels, and one of them becomes a fallen angel and takes a third of the angels with him. He had the free choice to disobey God and decided to do so. And so from that fall, we later get, of course, the fall of Adam and Eve. And believe it or not, if you think about the whole Christian story, you know what the whole Christian story is about? If you had to sum up the Bible or the whole Christian story in one word, what would it be?
Redemption.
Free will.
No, that's part of it. Well, you could say that, and these are all good. I would say it's redemption, right? You said it. You go, girl. You have. Don't be so incredulous. I mean, you have paradise lost in Genesis, paradise regained in Revelation. Everything in between is the story of redemption, where God comes to earth, adds humanity over his deity, and suffers for the creatures that actually rebelled against him so they could be redeemed, they could be bought back, they could be reconciled with him.
I think he's not really answering the question that this guy's asking. Like, why did God create the devil? He created angels according to Revelation, and a third of them rebelled. But if you are a person who says that this God you worship is all-knowing and all-powerful, not needy, has free will of his own, why do you need to create anything? Especially if you know the consequences of your creation. Why not just go fishing? Why not just go play golf? Do you need a golfing partner, God? Do you need someone to fish with, God? Do you have needs, Yahweh? Are you lonely? It seems like you almost have to believe that the God, Yahweh, is lonely, and that's why he had to create. He had this need inside him, that he's not self-sufficient. Otherwise, why create at all? Especially if you know that it's going to end up with people suffering here on earth and people going to hell for eternity, if you believe in that. Does not make any sense to me. I talked to a professional philosopher. I asked him that question. Isn't a world with nothing, let's assume God exists, isn't a world with Yahweh existing and nothing else better than a world with Yahweh and a creation existing? Even if everything turns out fine, but one person suffers. And if you're not needy, if you have free will, if God could choose not to create, why just take a pass? This is a question that I've never really got a good answer to by Christians. Well, I haven't got good answers to a lot of my questions. But
That's the whole story from Genesis to maps. All right? You guys don't have maps in the back of your Bible? Come on. That's the whole story. So yes, I think that's a good answer.
Okay, cool.
All right? Thank you.
someone in the comments says, where in the hell is monotheism? Yes, good point, Shane. I got so much grief in my Joel Osteen video because I dared question Christians, are you really monotheists? Because in the Old Testament, God says he's referred to as the God Most High God. Most High God implies that there is other gods. I see Dan was in here. He has a YouTube channel, Dan Simpson. You know, how could I call Dan the Most High YouTuber if there's no other YouTubers? It wouldn't make sense. So there has to be other gods, and Satan's even referred to as the god of this world. So Christians are not really monotheistic. And Jews are not really monotheistic. They are, what's the word? Henotheistic? They believe in many gods, just that one is the big one. One's the powerful one. The other ones are just kind of like, you know, Thor and Zeus and that sort of thing. Okay, let's see what else we got here. King James question? No, thank you. On the personal revelations of God. Oh, that's a good one. Let's try that. Never heard this before.
Yes, sir. What's your name?
Reg.
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 Nice to meet you.
Thank you. I heard about lying wonders. There are cults and things that
Hold on a quick sec. Can you bring up the monitors? Right here? Thank you. I'm sorry, sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, I heard about this thing called lying wonders. It looks like a miracle, but it's not done. It's not done through the power of God. It's done through the power of the enemy. It's called the lying wonders.
Yeah, lying, like satanic signs, like we mentioned earlier. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So have we covered that?
Yes, so when we say satanic signs, that's what we mean, that there is a dark realm out there. There is a dark side that can do lying signs and wonders. And Paul says, even if it was possible, they'd even be able to pull away the elect if it was possible. So we have to be very clear when we see something unusual to figure out, is this thing associated with truth and God, or is this thing associated with demons and falsehoods?
That's my question, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's what we need to be aware of. Is this something that's going to affirm the current revelation that we know is true, or is this thing going to disconfirm it? And if it's going to disconfirm it, it's not from God. In fact, when people say...
Okay, this is very interesting. I wonder when Paul, you remember Paul in the New Testament? He had that Damascus Road experience, and he saw Jesus appear to him. I wonder if Paul ever stopped to ask himself, now, is this the demon? Is this a demon? Is this Satan giving me this vision, or is this really Jesus? Like Frank is basically saying, you got to, sort this out. But, at that time, there was no New Testament. Paul was the first author of the New Testament. So it's not like he can check Scripture other than the Old Testament. So I wonder if that ever went through Paul's head, that maybe this experience is of the devil, that this isn't Jesus, this is the devil talking to me here on the road to Damascus. Same with Abraham. You know the Abraham-Isaac story where Yahweh apparently says to Abraham, sacrifice Isaac, kill Isaac for me. Do you think Abraham for a second thought to himself, the God I worship and serve would never ask such a question. This has to be the devil. No, as far as I know, he just says, okay, God, whatever you say. I'm a little, hesitant, but I'm sure this is going to work out fine. It's interesting how Christians today automatically say, okay, here's this miracle or here's this wonderful sign of something, but, it could be the devil or Satan or the demons, so we need to fact check it with the Scriptures and make sure it's in line. But they never apply that to the authors themselves of the Bible. They just assume that everything that they went through, those experiences, were from God. Okay. Here's one where Frank Turek was talking to a graduating class. This one's longer. I think I'm going to play it at 1.5x. And this one might cause me to laugh. I don't know.
Who's going to Chapel Hill here?
Oh, that's a little.
And I see there are 4 of ours. She wanted to take them to Chapel Hill. And I see there are 4 of ours. Who's going to Chapel Hill here?
1.2x.
Well, he said we sent her off there. About 4 weeks into her first semester, I got a phone call from her. Her words devastated me. She said, Dad, I don't believe in God anymore. I don't believe in God anymore. What? He said, I got in my car. I drove 4 hours down to Chapel Hill that weekend. I sat down with her, and I got nowhere with her.
Okay, he's telling a story of a Marine father. I've watched this one before. That his daughter goes off to school. She calls him a few weeks later and says, I'm not a Christian anymore. I don't believe in God anymore, actually. Here's my question for Christians watching this. So what? Why is that bad? Why is it bad that your own child leaves Christianity? Now, what's the first thought that pops in your head, Christian parents? I think if you're a fundamentalist conservative Christian, it's, my child's going to hell and burn for eternity. Be honest, is that the right answer? Is that what you're thinking, Christian parents? Or if you're a more liberal type Christian, it's, your life is going to be so much tougher now if without Jesus. You need Jesus to help you through the day. You need this belief in God to have meaning and purpose. We need more Christians in this country. Otherwise, it's going to just devolve into this mess, and sexual sins and abortions are just going to be rampant. And who's going to protect us from the evil terrorists if God's not having his protection around us? This is how in the United States, this is how a lot of Christians think. I know this because I've talked to a lot of them and I used to be one. And so Frank Turek makes his money combating this fear. Christian parents are paying him big bucks. Well, I don't know, Frank, how much you're making if you ever listen to this. They're paying sort of like a fear fee. We gotta stop this from happening. I've asked a lot of people that I've interviewed on Facebook, especially, like, why is leaving Christianity bad? The smart ones will say, well, because it's true. You shouldn't leave true things. And I agree with that. But what are the consequences for leaving this truth of Jesus? And I think this is what they're thinking. They're thinking hell and the moral decay of society. And I think it's in that order, actually, for most people. So this is why Christian parents are freaking out.
What do you mean you don't believe in God anymore? What happened? And she said, well, we have an atheist who teaches the New Testament class. No, it wasn't Bart Ehrman. It was somebody else. And he said, we don't even know who wrote the Gospels, and the Bible has errors in it, so, Dad, I'm an atheist now.
Both things are true. We don't know who wrote the Gospels, and the Bible does have errors in it.
Now, ladies and gentlemen, do you think this young woman in 4 weeks investigated all the evidence for and against Christianity and made a rational decision it was false?
Whoa. I love that comment by Frank. Excellent comment. I would say, yeah, Frank, I agree with you here. Like, you shouldn't just leave Christianity willy-nilly. You should take time and think about it. But let me ask you, Frank, did you know all the evidence for Christianity, the pros and cons, the critiques against it before you became a Christian? I doubt it. I think you were. I searched your personal testimony online, and I think you've kept it hidden. But if someone finds it, let me know. But I think you were born and raised in it. I think you don't remember a time you weren't a Christian. Did you think carefully about all the arguments for and against Christianity before you committed yourself to Christ?
No. What happened?
No.
She went off to college unarmed. She didn't
Perfect
know why
timing.
Christianity was true. And then she heard a couple of arguments that she thought might be evidence against it. And she said, well, you know, I just don't want to have the pressure of being a Christian here on college anyway. I kind of want to do my own thing. So she left the faith she said she believed in for her entire life.
How do you know that, Frank? Are you saying she just gave in to peer pressure and that's why she left Christianity? Like, maybe you're right. I don't know, but that's a huge leap. Maybe you know the details of this story, but I could say the exact same thing for most Christians. You just feel the pressure of staying in Christianity because of your youth groups and your Bible study groups and the community and the family, and that's the only reason why you're a Christian and you're staying in Christianity. Like, that's the reason why you don't want to look at the arguments against Christianity.
Life. So this father was asking me, what can I do? And I said, well, you could ask her a question.
Buy my
What's
books.
the question? Here's the question I ask all unbelievers, particularly atheists on college campuses. And it's this: if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian?
Okay, so if Frank Turek was here right now, well, he is kind of here right now, and he asked me that exact question, I'd say yes. I don't know, I forget what he's about to say. But if his follow-up question is why, I would say two reasons. Number one, I don't want to burn forever in hell. Because if Christianity is true, there's an afterlife. And hell, you can define whatever you want, but hell's not good. And Jesus spoke of hell more than any other character in the Bible. Now, if you say, Frank, that's a bad reason, sue me for becoming a Christian. I think a lot of Christians out there would say, no, Doug, that's pretty good reason to become a Christian, to avoid hell. But you should also love Jesus. Second reason is that if Christianity is true, then some of the miracles that you see in Acts might happen again, and that would be amazing. So I can see, if my child has a terminal illness, I can now, if Christianity is true, I can now pray with confidence that Jesus might heal my son or my daughter from this illness. So these are very selfish reasons. I want to avoid pain and I want to help others. But if becoming a Christian for selfish reasons are wrong, I don't want to be right.
I've had many atheists yell back at me, no! No?
I understand why, though.
Wait. I ask you, if Christianity were true, would you become a Christian? And you say no. How's that reasonable? How's that rational? It's not.
I kind of agree with Frank here, but I do understand why people who, when asked, would you believe in Christianity if it was true, and they say no, it is because Christianity at its core essence is an evil doctrine. And by the way, if you're a Christian, you just heard me say that I know that there's something inside you that just rebelled against that. But the evil doctrine is, and C.S. Lewis said it the best that the whole idea of making mistakes, sinning, and then having that sin, that responsibility of that sin, that wrongdoing cast upon another, scapegoating onto another, i.e. Jesus, is from the pits of hell. It's terrible. It's a horrible, horrendous idea. C.S. Lewis said that himself. And but apparently when God does it, then it's A-okay. That's like saying, vicarious redemption is like saying raping a woman is bad, but if God does it, it's okay. It's a very similar analogy, that if casting your sins would be bad, if Rachel in the chat did something terrible to Joy in the chat, and I took that punishment on Rachel's behalf without even consulting with Joy first, asking her permission, asking, is it okay if I pay that penalty for Rachel? That's a terrible thing for me to do. This is Rachel's responsibility because she did something bad to Joy. But this is exactly what Jesus did. Without even consulting the people who were harmed, injured, he took the sins of others. But if you're God, apparently it's okay.
I submit to you, when you go to college, you'll be more pressured by morality than you will be anything else. Everything's going to be sexualized. Every pressure is going to come at you to take you away from what you've learned here at Trinity, which is a school, as you know, at the very top echelon of Christian schools. But you are going to have so much pressure put on you to walk away from what you know is true. You see that banner up there? Philippians chapter 4. Whatever is true, whatever's honorable, whatever's just, whatever's pure, whatever's lovely, whatever's commendable, if there's any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think on these things. I submit to you, virtually every college campus will teach you the opposite.
Frank, if it were true that Christianity is not true, would you leave it? Non-believers, non-Christians, atheists, if you ever asked the question by a guy like Frank, if Christianity is true, would you believe it? I recommend you say yes, but you can say whatever you want. But I do recommend you flip that question around and say, Frank, if Christianity wasn't true, would you stop believing it? He's forced to say yes at that point. Like, of course I would stop believing it. But I still think it's worth asking.
Opposite. And if you think I'm making this up, you've had your head in the sand. You know the easiest way to get picked off in a war is to not know you're in one. You are about to enter the battlefield. And I want to give you 4 reasons or 4 questions you need to answer to show that Christianity is true. Many of you already know this because you're at a great school. But just as a reminder.
For people who came in late, I'm running it at 1.2x, so if he's talking fast, that's why.
I want you to remember these 4 questions. You thought school was over? Actually, it's just starting. It's just starting. Of course, as you continue to grow, you're going to be less and less the student and more the teacher. And that's important. But here are the 4 questions you need to answer to show that Christianity is true. The first question is, does truth exist?
Yes.
The second question is, does God exist?
Probably not.
The third question is, are miracles possible?
Maybe.
And the fourth question is, the New Testament and therefore the Bible true?
Probably not. Some things are probably true, some things are probably not. That's reasonable, right, Frank?
If you answer those 4 questions in the affirmative, because there's evidence that the answer to those 4 questions is yes, then Christianity's true. Let's just take a minute on each one of these, or a couple of minutes. The first question is, does truth exist? You may hear people say there is no truth. You got your truth, I got my truth. All truth is relative. When you go off to the academy, not Trinity Academy, but the college, they're going to basically push this kind of relativism on you. But
okay, Frank's assuming that every non-Christian alive is a postmodernist type person who says, if it's, this is my truth, this is your truth, that's his truth, her truth, everywhere a truth. No, we're not all like that. In fact, I'm on your side, Frank. I got your back on this one. I do think there's this thing called truth out there, that whether we exist or not, that there's rocks and stars and so forth, that we don't need minds to, that it's independent of minds, let's put it this way. But I do think it's silly to say there's no such thing as relative truth. Like the example I always give is the statement. This is a claim. I'm going to make a claim. And we're going to ask the question, is it true or not? The claim is, today is Friday in the United States. Is that true? Is that really, really true? Is that claim I just made true? Well, right now it is, but tomorrow it won't be. There's a very simple example of relative truth. Another thing is, I can give other examples, but you get the idea. I'm sure people can think of better ideas.
You all know this because you've been going to Trinity and you've taken logic. Unfortunately, most schools don't teach logic anymore. But if someone were to ever say to you, there is no truth, you should ask that person a question. What should the question be? This is the interactive portion of the program. School's not over. Go. What would you say? There is no truth. Go. What would you say? Yeah, you'd say, how is that true? Or, is that true? Is it true that there is?
Don't you hate it when Christian apologists do these gotcha questions? Oh, man, that bothers me.
There is no truth, because if it's true that there is no truth, the claim there is no truth can't be true, but it claims to be true. Did I say that right? I know that can give you intellectual constipation if you think about it long enough, but that's because it's self-defeating. And if there's one skill you need to know when you go to college, and for the rest of you, you're just out there in life, you need to know this skill too. The skill is apply the claim to itself. See if the claim meets its own standard. If somebody says there is no truth, that claim doesn't meet its own standard because that very claim claims to be true. It's like saying I can't speak a word in English. If I were to say I can't speak a word in English, you'd go, huh? Or it's like saying my parents had no kids that...
If there's any Christians watching this who ever get to talk to Frank Turek, tell him to, like, ask him, you do realize there's a lot of non-Christians who don't take this postmodern view that you're railing against, right? And hopefully say, yeah, I get that. Like, I'm not sure why he's picking this specifically.
Or it's like saying my brother is an only child. Or it's like saying everything I say is a lie. Some of you will get that tomorrow. Or it's like saying all generalizations are false. Some of you will never get that one. These are self-defeating statements. You're going to hear this. All truth comes from science. What question would you ask somebody who says that? Yeah, does that truth come from science?
I've never met a person that says all truth comes from science. And someone in the, Mark in the chat just asked, Doug, genuine question, is all truth empirical truth? Probably not. I don't know. I doubt it. I think there's some truths that you cannot test empirically. But the problem is, how do you get to know them? Like, you're talking Revelation now or what? I don't know.
Science. No, it doesn't come from science at all. It's a philosophical claim. You couldn't do science without philosophy. Science is built on philosophy. You couldn't understand the Bible or the newspaper without philosophy. So don't let them snow you with this postmodern relative.
Don't let them snow you. It's always an us versus them. Not always, sorry. It's often an us versus them situation in Christianity. It's those who walk in darkness and those who walk in the light.
And of course, the granddaddy of them all, you're going to go off to college campus and you're going to have certain moral beliefs, and they're going to tell you, you ought not judge. If someone ever says you ought not judge, what question should you ask them? Apply the claim to itself. What would you say? Yeah, isn't that a judgment? I mean, if somebody says you ought not judge, put your hands on your hips and say, then why are you judging me for judging?
Frank, all this is totally irrelevant. Totally irrelevant to, I would say, the majority of non-Christians in university campuses. Well, maybe... Let me rephrase that. Irrelevant to, I think, the majority of non-Christians in the United States.
See, because it's a judgment. No, Jesus didn't say don't judge. He said don't judge hypocritically. In John 7:24, he says stop judging by mere appearances and make a right judgment. Everybody's making judgments. Atheists make judgments. Yep. Christians make judgments. Everyone in between makes judgments. The only question is, are your judgments true?
Yes, I agree with that. And the next question is, how do we know it is true? That's the important question, because you can have this thing called truth on a particular matter, but if there's no way of possibly figuring out what that is, man, yeah, it's there, but what good is it? I think he's going to talk about morality, but I think objective morality falls in that category. Let's say there is this thing called objective morality from this God concept. If there's no way to figure out what it is, okay, sure, there's objective morality, but who cares? Like, if we don't know what it is, or how to apply it, or in what situation it works.
And you've got a great foundation here at Trinity, but I am warning you right now, and parents, I'm warning you.
Warning.
That a foundation isn't enough. You need to ensure you stay in fellowship with other Christians,
Whoa.
And that you stay connected to Christ. Because if you don't stay connected to Christ, you're going to get picked off.
Oh, picked off. Wow. Okay. What he just said is, foundation's not enough. I'm not sure what he means by that. But you need to have fellowship, relationship with Jesus. Otherwise, you're going to get picked off. Frank, imagine I'm a Muslim right now, and I'm speaking to a crowd of Muslim youth. I say, look, Muslim youth, it's not enough just to have a good foundation in the Quran. You need to fellowship consistently with other Muslims, committed Muslims. You need to be committed to the truth of the Quran and the idea that there's only one God, and Allah is his name, and Muhammad is his prophet. And otherwise, these Christians are going to pick you off.
And it's not going to be for intellectual reasons. It's going to be for moral reasons. You're going to want to fit in with everybody else. You're not going to want to be called names. You're not going to want to be the target of those atheistic college professors. You're going to want to fit in. You need to be in the world, but not of it.
You want to fit in. I don't know what percentage of college campuses are, the people walking around there are atheists, like self-declared atheists. I still think atheists on college campuses are the minority, are they not? So he's painting this picture of the Christians are the minority, and you have to be brave and show yourself strong for the Lord because the majority of these atheists are going to pick you off. No, I agree. Maybe the majority of professors are atheists, but even then, I doubt that. I think a lot of them are deists.
So the first question is, does truth exist? Obviously it does, because if there was no truth, you wouldn't even be going to college, would you? In fact, if there's no truth, any book written by an atheist can't be true either, right? Everybody's making truth claims. The only question is, what is true?
I want to make another comment here. You notice how he's giving a speech to young kids. He's not mentioning Hinduism here. He's not mentioning Islam. He's not mentioning Taoism. Why is that? He's just mentioning atheism when talking about opposition to Christianity. He's mentioning it because that's the biggest threat right now in the United States for the Christian youth. And actually, I don't even think it's that much of a threat. I think it's just pure doubt is the real threat.
The second question is, does God exist? Is there really a being out there known as God? And what I mean by God, a theistic God. What's a theistic God? A spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, moral, personal, intelligent creator who not only created the entire universe, but sustains it, is holding it.
What does a spaceless God mean? What does a timeless God mean? What are these words you're uttering? It does not compute. I think Frank believes in a personal God. What is it to say that a personal God is outside of time? Like, really think about that for a second. Let's say God has a thought, or he's about to create. Okay, so imagine Yahweh, and imagine he's about to create the universe. I have a question for Frank. Was there a time before the creation of the universe? Can we say that just before God created the universe, he thought something? And if the answer is yes, God's not outside of time. He's in time, just not seconds time, but he's in time in a temporal sense, in a thinking sense. So Frank, I hate to break it to you, but your God is not outside time.
Together right now as we sit here. Is there evidence for that kind of being? Yes, there's very good evidence. 3 lines of evidence. The first piece of evidence is that the universe exploded into being out of nothing.
Ugh. What do you do with that? It's like, how do we know that it exploded out of nothing? As far as we know, we really don't. We have theories, but we don't know what happened just before the Big Bang. Lawrence Krauss, he uses the word nothing, but it's not the nothing that this Frank guy is saying is nothing. It's like net zero energy. That's what Lawrence Krauss is talking about. All we know is that the universe was really tiny and exploded. And another thing. This whole term universe is just, when we say universe, we're talking about our reality as far as we can see, the stars, the planets, everything, atoms. But that doesn't, our universe, our reality, there could be other realities with different laws of nature, in quotes, that are different than ours. Do we know this for certain? No, of course not. But I think that it's an important distinction. So our universe has its own time, its own laws, its own physical constants, and so forth. But there's nothing to, we don't know what caused the Big Bang. It could have been a different reality, like your God, Frank, or like another universe. We don't know. This is why I think humility and being able to say, I don't know, is very important.
Once there was no space, once there was no matter, once there was no time, and then the entire space-time continuum leapt into existence. Even atheists are admitting this now. Even Stephen Hawking, who's an atheist, says almost everyone now believes that space-time and matter had a beginning.
Our space, our time, our matter had a beginning. That's a very important distinction.
Out of nothing. If that's the case, whatever created space-time and matter can't be made of space-time and matter, right? In other words, it must be spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful to create the universe out of nothing, personal in order to choose to create.
How do you know all this?
Also intelligent, because this universe is also fine-tuned, which is the second line of evidence that God exists. Now, when you think of a spaceless, timeless, immaterial, powerful, personal, intelligent
I've already just shown that if you have a personal God, he's not outside of time.
cause, who do you think of? That's what we mean by a theistic God.
Okay, Frank, let's say I buy everything you just said. Why couldn't there be two gods? 3, 4. Let's say there's a family of gods. There's 5 of them. And they each decided to be in charge of a certain portion of the universe. Or maybe one god was in charge of some physical constants and the others not. How do you get to one? Is it just because you think there'd be infighting if there was more than one and that you can't have fighting amongst gods? I don't know.
The second piece of evidence is the fine-tuning of the universe, that if you were to change any one of a number of factors just imperceptibly about the universe, for example, if you were to change, say, the gravitational force by more than 1 part in 10 to the 40, we wouldn't be here.
Okay, this is, do I say it? Yeah, I'm going to say it. This is stupid. And here's why it's stupid. Okay, if you, Christians, or anybody, if you ever get to meet Frank Turek, and you get to do the question and answer at the end of the show, ask him, and if he mentions fine-tuning, ask him, is your God limited in his creation? Like, is he under certain laws that he can't do certain things, can't create in a certain way? In other words, you could be very specific. Could God have created the universe to sustain us, maybe a different version of us, but to sustain life with different physical constants? I dare a Christian to say no to that, because they're basically putting their God in a box then, saying, no, he can't do that. We're not talking about a logical contradiction here. We're talking about just, that fine-tuning is the universe has gauges, and God set all the gauges just right. He fine-tuned all the gauges so we could have this universe sustain life in a very tiny portion of it. But if your God's all-powerful, he could just, anything I want, and poof, we got life. Sorry for the I Dream of Genie.
You say, what's 1 part in 10 to the 40? It's 1 part in 1 with 40 zeros following it. You say, Frank, I can't get my head around that number. Let me give you an illustration. Take a tape measure and stretch it across the entire known universe. By the way, that's a long way. Set the gravitational force at a particular inch mark on that tape measure. I realize gravity is not measured in inches. This is just give you a scale idea in your mind. If you were to move the strength of gravity 1 inch in either direction, across a scale as wide as the entire known universe, we wouldn't be here.
We wouldn't be here unless God made it work. So if we just changed that a little bit, we wouldn't be here unless God said, oh, no, I want you to be here, so I'm going to move it a little bit more, and you'll still be here. Are you putting God in a box there, Frank?
That's how fine-tuned the universe is. Somebody put that value right there.
The universe is so fine-tuned that 96% of the universe is dark matter or dark energy. Boy, that's fine-tuned for life, isn't it? The universe is so fine-tuned that our planet is not really habitable for humans. Most of the region is covered in water, and we can't breathe underwater. We need oxygen. Or it's too cold, like at the poles, or it's too hot, like at the equator. How is the universe being so vast and so empty of life, and how is our own planet being so inhospitable to life evidence of fine tuning by a creator. This is just too easy.
I don't have enough faith to believe that that happened by chance. Also, think about your amazing biology. Do you know there's a word inside of you? It's in your genome. Every one of your 40 trillion trillion cells has a word that's 3.5 billion letters long. All the letters are in the right order. I mean, if you're walking along the beach and you see in the sand, John loves Mary, what do you assume?
This is why I put the title Try Not to Laugh Challenge, because I'm seriously trying not to laugh.
The waves did that? Crabs came out of the water and made that message? No, you're going to say that that message requires intelligence. Well, if a message, John loves Mary, requires intelligence, how about a message 3.5 billion letters long? Yeah, that's inside of every one of you. In fact, let's go back to when...
The message inside our cells, DNA, is not information like that, Frank. It is molecules, it's shapes based on 4 nucleotides, keeping 2 RNA strands together to form the DNA. And these shapes and molecules are very well understood in science. We know how they work. It's not information in the sense that you're talking about. And I want to give an example here of information. Like Frank's whole idea is that DNA is information, and information must have an author. You go to Yuma, Arizona, just west of Yuma, Arizona. There's sand dunes, and I drive by there often, and you will see different patterns in the sand, and the patterns change depending on, if it's on a hill, a flat, on what side of the hill it is. It depends on the winds. The patterns change. That's information. You can go and look at it and conclude things by just looking at the patterns in the sand. Did a mind create that information? Now, a Christian would say, yeah, because God created the sand. But no, seriously, just based on the sand and the wind. Wind doesn't have a mind, the sand doesn't have a mind, but yet there's information there, correct? Just take it one step further there, Frank.
Let's go back to the very beginning of you. I mean, you guys are what, 18 now? Let's go back to when your mother and father got together to conceive you.
Coitus.
Have you guys had this talk before? I see some young people in here, so I'll try and be discreet. I also see some older people in here, so I'll try and be discreet as well, just in case you've forgotten how this works. All right? But when your mother and your father got together to have you, your mother unconsciously perfumed her egg, and then your father sent the entire population of the United States, 300 million soldiers, toward your mother's egg.
Onward, Christian soldiers.
And then there was a race, and you won. Don't let anyone ever tell you you're not special.
I'm special. My mom told me so.
You beat out 300 million others. You have blown away anything Michael Phelps has done. In fact, seeing some of you limp in here earlier makes it hard for me to believe you were the fastest soldier in the gene pool, but you were. Now, from the very moment of conception, a construction project of astonishing complexity began taking place. Cells began multiplying at a rate of 4,000 cells per second.
Whoa, 4,000 cells per second. I call BS on that. Someone fact check that. Cells 4,000 per second? No.
Brain cells began multiplying at a rate of 100,000 cells per second.
Really? He could be right, but my BS detector's going off.
Second. For most of you, anyway. Some cells became brain cells, others heart cells, others lung cells. How do they know how to do this? Nobody knows. Some cells went so far across you to become what they needed to become that it would be equivalent to you today walking across the United States alone. And that construction project continues to this day. You just made 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. You just made another 4 million new red blood cells. Knock it off. Are you sitting there going, hey, Frank, hold on, I got to concentrate.
You know where this is all going, right? We're just like so complex, and there's just, it's unbelievable. It's undescribable. It's like It's amazing how detailed and how complex it is. Therefore, there must be a God doing all this stuff. Special pleading, because isn't God complex? Isn't he intricate? Wouldn't he need someone behind? Wouldn't he need a creator to sustain God?
I got to make new red blood cells. No, this is just happening. Why is it happening without your knowledge? You're not even thinking about it. Why is it happening? Because there's an external intellect sustaining these processes. The entire natural world is going in a direction. I'm going in a direction, you're going in a direction, and we're not even thinking about it. Why? Because there is a mind out there.
I'm wondering, like, does Frank really believe that God has like strings on the tips of his fingers and is controlling the universe? Like he's controlling everything?
Aristotle called this the unmoved mover. Aquinas called it his fifth way to argue for God. That not only does God create the universe, he sustains the universe. He's holding together the entire universe, and he's moving it in a direction. He's moving our bodies in a direction.
He's moving the universe in a direction. Do you know what that direction ultimately is, Frank? It's the blowing up of our sun, and us, meaning our solar system, our planet at least, is going to die. That's the ultimate direction that God is leading us to, death.
We sit here. He's holding this universe together. He's holding this gym together right now. You say, how so? Why don't these pillars just crumble? Well, because there's these four natural forces out there holding them together. Why are the four natural forces so consistent and precise? Because there's a mind out there holding the universe together.
Unless your God chooses to change those laws of nature and make them not precise, i.e. a miracle.
The third argument for God after the beginning, the sustaining and fine-tuning, is the moral argument.
Here we go.
And this is going to be big on a college campus.
Why is it big on a college campus, morality? I'll tell you why. Premarital sex. Frank knows this. He knows that kids 18, 19, 20, 21, he knows they want to have sex. He knows that the Christian kids have these desires. He knows it's, in his view, a temptation. And so this is why he says this is the biggest factor. Sex is a powerful drive.
The only point I want to make here is if there's just one thing morally wrong out there, just one, like it's wrong to torture babies for fun, then there has to be a God. Why?
There has to be a God if torturing babies for fun is wrong. Okay, I'll bite. Why?
Because if there is no God, if there is no being beyond humanity, then that's just your opinion against a baby torturer's opinion.
Oh, it's just a matter of opinion, you say. Okay, Frank. I'll bite again. Oh, I wish Frank Turek would come on my show. Someone who has connections, get him on my show. I would ask Frank this: why is God's opinion better than mine? Ooh. I'm not saying it isn't, but Frank, can you explain to me why God's opinion on morality is better than mine? Now, Frank might say, well, because God created the universe. And I'd say, so? Does being powerful mean that you're always right about everything? Well, no, Doug, good point. How about this, Doug? Well, because God is all-knowing. He can see the future. Now that is an answer I can get behind. And here's why. Because if this God can see the future consequences of my moral choices and can tell me ahead of time, oh, don't do that because that will lead to this. And that helps me to, let's say, avoid pain or avoid inflicting pain on another. Okay, I'm in. I'm all for it. But now I got a next question. How do I know that God's transmitting that knowledge, that foreknowledge to me, and I'm just not making it up in my head? How do I know? Like that's the real problem here. The third option Frank could say to me why God's opinion is better than mine is it just is based on the definition of good and moral. But at that point, I could say, well, I could just say well-being and unnecessary suffering just is the definition of good and moral and not your God's. So it's just we're just doing a little presuppositional face-off here.
It's just your opinion against, say, Hitler's opinion. If he wants to murder 6 million Jews, that's just his opinion. If there's no standard beyond you and Hitler, who's to say he's really wrong?
If there's no standard beyond him and Hitler, who's to say he's wrong? Okay, Frank? Thought experiment for you. Imagine God has the God that created the universe has the same nature as Hitler. Oof. I don't do thought experiments, Doug. I don't do hypotheticals like that. Come on, you just said philosophy is good, right? It's the standard basis of all sciences. Let's do some philosophy here. Imagine for a moment that the God who created the universe has the same moral nature as Hitler. Now, everything that Hitler said was good, this God says it's good, because he has the moral nature of Hitler. So then anything against that nature of Hitler is now bad. You see what I'm getting at? We're just left with this divine command theory stuff.
This is one of the most powerful arguments for the existence of God. And in college, everyone's going to talk about moral rights. They have a right to this, a right to that. You need to stop and say, what do you mean by rights, and where do rights come from? Because if there is no God, they're not rights, they're just preferences. So ask them, where do rights come from? If there's no God, there's no right to anything. Even all their pet
rights come from humans.
Right, same-sex marriage, homosexuality, whatever their right is. There's no right to anything if there is no God. It's just a preference.
And you prefer, Frank, to believe in this concept of God as talked about in the Bible, which, I don't want to go into the Old Testament now.
The third question, after truth and God, are miracles. How can we believe in miracles? When you go to college, you'll be mocked for believing in miracles. Think miracles actually occur? You think Jonah actually happened? Is that a tail of a whale or a whale of a tail? What's the deal with Jonah? You think a resurrection could actually occur? We don't believe in miracles anymore. That's all superstitious nonsense. But let me ask you a question, ladies and gentlemen. Anybody in here? What's the greatest miracle in the Bible?
The greatest miracle in the Bible? Genesis 1:1, of course. But let's talk about miracles. Frank, I hope miracles happen. I hope miracles are possible. I do think miracles are possible. I think most people do. I think most people would love to see a miracle. And I won't get into defining what a miracle is, but some low probability event. But I think there's so many claims in this world of miracles. Frank, do we believe them all? Of course not. We know that there's so many claims of miracles that just turn out to be false, that it can be explained another way. So how do you know that the miracles as described in the Bible are not examples of that? What's more likely, Frank, that a man actually lived in the belly of a great fish for 3 days, or a book just says so, or it's in a parable of some sorts, or a word picture of some sorts? What's more likely, Frank, that a man named Jesus rose from the dead, or a book just says so? What's more likely, Frank, that 500 people saw the risen Savior, or a book just says so and maybe it didn't happen? I could go on and on and on.
It's not the resurrection. Resurrection's easy. What is the greatest miracle in the Bible? The greatest miracle in the Bible is the first verse. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. If that verse is true, every other verse is at least possible, right?
I love that. If the first verse in the Bible is true, then every other verse is at least, or miracle is at least possible. Shouldn't we be more concerned about what's probable than what's possible when we're actually trying to figure out what's true? It's possible that red polka-dotted elephant's going to crash into my house right now. But that's just silliness. Let's talk about what's probable if we're really concerned about truth.
I mean, if it's true that God created the heavens and the earth out of nothing, can he do whatever he wants? It's not logically impossible inside the heavens and the earth? Of course. Well, we now have scientific evidence and even philosophical evidence. I don't have time to get into it here. But we have that evidence that the universe had a beginning. Even atheists are admitting this. Well, if the first
Our universe had a beginning.
verse is true, every other verse is at least possible.
Sure, I'll buy that. But I'm more concerned about what's probable, not what's possible.
If God can create the universe out
I'm not saying the possible can't happen. I'm not saying miracles can't happen. By the way, side note here. If you're a believer, if you're a Christian who believe that in sensationalism, that miracles really don't happen anymore, shame on you. Shame on you. If you're going to believe in a God, believe in a God that can do something at least.
of nothing. Can he raise Jesus from the dead? Yes. Can he keep Jonah alive in a fish for 3 days? Can he do the Noah miracle? Can he part the Red Sea? Can he make axe heads float in water? Can he walk on water? That's easy for God and create the universe out of nothing. Now, the other objection, in fact, when people say, I don't believe in miracles.
Walking on water, like Frank, are you even aware that there's texts in history that predate the New Testament that talk about humans walking on water and so forth? You don't believe those, do you?
Miracles, I normally say, look around, you're living in one. This universe is a miracle. But secondly, people don't believe in miracles anymore. Why? Because they've never seen one. Well, why should you expect to see a miracle? Miracles, by definition, have to be rare. If they were happening all...
Why should we expect to see a miracle? Frank. If you're a Christian, you should expect to see miracles. I'm trying to think of the verse. Jesus said, I tell you the truth, that you will do far greater things than what I've done. What did Jesus do? He raised the dead. He made the blind to see. He made the lame to walk. He walked on water. Jesus says that everyone, followers of him, will do greater things than him. So, yeah, I agree miracles are not common, but you should at least expect as a believer to do the things Jesus did. Or do you not believe that portion in the Bible?
All the time, they wouldn't be miracles. They'd be natural events. Miracles have to be rare to get our attention. And the greatest miracle after the...
Miracles have to be rare to get our attention. Okay, fair enough. Why hasn't God got my attention through a miracle? If miracles are so good at getting someone's attention, and if God wants my attention, I'm ready to see a miracle. And I'm not going to be one of those atheists who says, no, I'm just deceiving myself, blah, 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 blah. No, there's ways to test if I'm deceived or not. If I'm hallucinating, for example. I'm ready. If God is real, if God is true, you're God, Frank, and if he is capable of doing miracles today, I am totally open to that idea. I am ready to see it. I dare God to do it. God did it for the Jews in the book of John. There was unbelieving, hard-hearted, stubborn Jews. Imagine, okay, I'm hard-hearted, stubborn Doug. I'm just like them in the book of John. And what did Jesus do? To help them believe, he rose Lazarus from the dead. Okay. Why am I not as good as those Jews in the book of John? Why can't I see someone raised from the dead? Am I not as important?
After the creation of the universe in the Bible is the resurrection. Let me ask you a question. If resurrections were occurring all the time, what would the resurrection of Christ mean to us? I mean, if people were popping up from the dead routinely, it would be no big deal, right?
Well, it was no big deal back then. It says that when Jesus died, when he was crucified, that the graves were open and many, we don't know how many, but many rose from the dead. And there's other examples in the New Testament where people rise from the dead. As Christopher Hitchens said, it seems like, I can't do a British accent, but he says it seemed like resurrections were a banality back then.
You go to somebody, you go, hey, Jesus rose from the dead for your sins. And the guy goes, well, so what? Uncle George just rose from the dead 2 weeks ago. Now I got to give the inheritance back. You go, no, they have to be rare if they're going to get our attention, and miracles are rare for that very reason. Now, the fourth question you have to answer after truth, God, and miracles is, are the New Testament documents historically reliable? Because
No.
if they're historically reliable, the entire Bible is true. You say, how so?
No. How does that follow, Frank? If the New Testament, did he say New Testament reliable, or did he say the whole Bible? If he said the whole Bible, then I could maybe buy it. But just because one part of the Bible is true doesn't mean another part is. That's my point, Frank. The Jews, the Muslims, they're agreed that the New Testament is not reliable. Orthodox Jews, Muslims, do not agree that the New Testament's reliable. Secularists don't believe the New Testament's reliable. The only people that can see that the New Testament is reliable are, you guessed it, Christians. And what good is it that only the Christians can see it as reliable? How can we use that as evidence if only the believers can see that evidence?
Oh, because if Jesus really was who he said he was in the New Testament, if he really was God, whatever God teaches is true. Jesus taught the entire Old Testament is the Word of God. So if the New Testament's reliable, you get the Old Testament thrown in. Now, there's a lot.
I agree with that. If the New Testament's reliable, you get the Old Testament in for free. I agree with that. But it does not work the other way around, Frank. Think about this. I'm gonna pound Frank here hard. It is possible, Frank, that the Old Testament is true and reliable, but the New Testament is unreliable and mostly false. Would you agree with that, Frank? He has to. He has to take that thought experiment seriously. I agree the reverse. If the New Testament is true, then the Old Testament has to be. It comes in. But the reverse is not true. The Old Testament could be true, and the Old Testament could be true, and the New Testament false. And I'm describing Orthodox Judaism right now. So, Frank, I'm going to throw in Pascal's wager here. Why are you taking such a huge risk, Frank? You're risking it all here because you're a Trinitarian. You think Jesus is God. If you are wrong and the Orthodox Jews are right, you are in worse shape than the atheist. Every Christian Trinitarian listening to this right now, do you understand the risk you're taking? You are committing the worst sin ever if you are wrong. I'm serious. If Yahweh is real and Jesus is not God and you worship Jesus as God, you are breaking the first commandment, thou shalt not have any gods before me. Do you realize the risk you're taking here? Do you realize you may burn for eternity for worshiping Jesus if Jesus is not God? Now, you could be a Christian and not view Jesus as God and not worship Jesus, but I'm not talking to you people. I'm talking about those Christians who worship Jesus. Next time, atheists, next time a Christian uses Pascal's wager on you, hit them with that. Now, it probably will have no effect, but because they'll just say, well, Jesus is God, so I have nothing to worry about. And I could say, well, Jesus isn't God, so I have nothing to worry about. So there we go. The question is, maybe we should take a step back and ask ourselves, do we have good reasons to think any of this is true? And I say, we don't.
A lot of evidence that the New Testament's reliable. Let me just give you one piece of evidence. It's not conclusive by itself, but it's a pretty intuitive piece of evidence. There's something called embarrassing details in the New Testament documents that they never would have invented. The New Testament writers would never invent embarrassing details about themselves. So when historians see embarrassing details, they normally go, this is probably true, because they wouldn't invent this. In fact, let me ask you guys a question. How many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look good? If you don't have your hand up right now, you're lying to make yourself look good, and we know you're lying. It's not working. All right, how many people in here have ever lied to make yourself look bad? You don't lie to make yourself look bad. You may lie to make yourself look good. In other words, you don't invent embarrassing details about yourself.
You don't invent embarrassing details about yourself. Frank, have you ever read a novel where you have characters main characters, the protagonist even, who the novel talks about embarrassing things they do? Why would that ever happen? My goodness. See, this is the problem, I think. The problem is, guys like Frank, when they read the New Testament, they think they're reading history. And I understand why. And when it comes to Paul, I can almost sort of go there. But when it comes to the four Gospels, no. You're not reading a historical document here. So when you have a story, you're going to have characters like the stupid disciples not even realizing that Jesus is God and these sort of things, and having to be told like 5 times in a row certain things in order to get it. And this is called a literary device to make the story interesting, engaging, to send a message, have a moral, have it build and crescendo and then climax. Like if you look at the Gospel of Mark, it's that. It's like you got Jesus in the ministry and the teachings, and then that excruciating scene where he's dying and pain, and then the glory. Actually, Mark ends in a cliffhanger, and then the sequel, Matthew, talks about the glory. But anyhow.
And the New Testament documents are filled with embarrassing details they never would have invented. For example, Peter, their leader, is called Satan by Jesus. You think they invented this? You think Mark, who wrote this down, said to Peter one time, hey, Pete.
Yes, I think they did.
Pete, I'm going to make this a real interesting
Actually, they didn't. A lot of it they got from the Old Testament.
story. I'm going to have the Lord call you Satan. What do you think Peter would have said? Have him call you Satan. Why is he calling me Satan? I'm the leader here.
And another example I'd like to give is there's Gospels outside the canon that talk about Jesus as a kid and killing other kids, and then, or at least one kid, and then bringing them back to life. That's very embarrassing, at least from today's standards. That's another point. What's embarrassing today might not be embarrassing back then. There's a lot of problems with this criteria of embarrassment.
And then the disciples at the crucifixion run away. This is embarrassing. It's like a Monty Python movie, right? Run away. They all run away. And who are the brave ones? The women. The women are the brave ones. Now, who wrote the New Testament down? Men. Now, what man is going to invent that he was hiding for fear of the Jews why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb? Would any man in here, Dr. Littlejohn, would you invent that? No. No man would say that he was hiding for fear of the Jews why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb. In fact, if I was inventing it, I'd write something down like this. Let's see. We marched right down there and overpowered that elite Roman guard.
Matthew is the only gospel that talks about a guard at the tomb. Women, part of the story, we have like this tomb and a burial. Back then, the tradition, the customs were that the women performed the burial rites because men were too good to deal with dead people, the uncleanliness of it all and so forth. And plus, it fits with the narrative that the first shall be last and the last shall be first. It's all part of the story, Frank.
John said, get out. Peter, roundhouse kicked him.
And another thing, the stories don't even match on the women going to the tomb. Was it 1? Was it 2? Was it 3? Was it 4? Every gospel changes. If you're a Christian, this is what bothered me when I was a Christian and I was going through this stuff. I was forced every time to take the maximal view. So whenever there was a conflict in the Gospels, you always have to take the bigger view in order to avoid a contradiction. You can't say there was only 2 women who went to the tomb to find the empty tomb, because Luke says 4 or more. So if you say there was only 2 and Luke says 4, oops, we got a problem. So you have to say there was 4 or more, and Matthew only mentioned 2, for example, and he just didn't talk about the others.
Philip said, we'll be back. And then on Sunday morning, we marched right down there. We saw Jesus emerging from the tomb, resurrected. He then congratulated us on our great faith. And then we went and comforted the trembling women.
It's almost over, guys.
I would never say I was Mr. Sissy Pants why the women went down and discovered the empty tomb. And oh, by the way, why would you never invent that in that culture? Because in that culture, a woman's testimony was not considered on par with that of a man. So if you're making up the New Testament story, you'd only have the men be.
Not true, Frank. Not true. According to, I talked to Richard Carrier personally. He said that wasn't true in a court of law. And again, this is not a court of law situation, but
the first witnesses. But all 4 Gospels say the women were the first witnesses, which is telling us what? They were. They wouldn't have invented it. In fact, I had a lady come up to me once. She said, I know why Jesus appeared to the women first. I said, why? And she said, because he wanted to get the story out.
You know, that's so funny. It's almost like I know the Gospels better than Frank does, because he wouldn't have made that comment if he really knew the Gospels, because in the book of Mark, it says that the women told no one. The joke just falls flat if you're reading this from Mark's perspective.
I said that is an excellent point. I hadn't thought of that, because ladies, when your man comes home from work, does he say much? There could have been a nuclear explosion down at the plant. He's not going to tell you. You'll see it on the news before he tells you. But, hey, I'm not watching the news. Oh, yeah, I forgot to tell you. You know, I was going to tell you, but there's much other evidence that the New Testament documents is true. The New Testament documents are true. If they're true, then Christianity is true. So if truth exists, and it does, if God...
Is it reasonable, Frank, that some things in the New Testament are true and some things false? By the way, if anybody gets to go to Frank Turek's meetings and is at the mic at the Q&A section, ask that question. Frank, is it reasonable that some things in the New Testament may be true and some things false? Ooh, he will not like that question, because that is such a reasonable question and such an easy question to say, yeah, of course that's reasonable to say that some things might be true and some things false. But if he was to admit that, now he has the difficult task of trying to figure out which is which.
Exists, and he does. If miracles are possible, and they are, in fact, the greatest miracles already occurred, then a miracle like a resurrection can occur, especially since Jesus not only predicted it, he accomplished it, as the evidence shows. So what you've learned for 4 years, or some of you 12 or 13 years here at Trinity, is actually true. That's why you need to make sure that you meditate on whatever is true, because you're going to be pressured to meditate on your feelings, not the truth. You're going to be pressured to walk away from everything.
I would submit that most Christians are Christians because of their feelings, not because of any of the evidences you mentioned. Maybe I shouldn't say most. I'll say a lot. A lot are Christians because they feel God's presence. They feel the love of Jesus. Christians are Christians because they love Jesus, or at least they try to love Jesus.
Thing you've learned here. In fact, 75% of young people who are brought up in the church walk away from the church once they go to college.
75%?
Don't let that be you.
Okay, I want to give a little olive branch to Christians here. If 75% of Christians leave when they go to college, I guarantee you some of them will come back. So I don't know what percentage of them will come back. And I think, I'm going to get in trouble for saying this, but most of them that will come back to Christianity after college are females, and it will be after they have babies. Am I going to get in trouble for saying that? But here's my theory. My theory is that that once you have children as a mother, and I think that evolution explains this, it's that nesting drive, that it is way more comfortable to believe that there's a God watching over your kids when you can't. It's a lot more comfortable to think that God has your children in his hands if they were to die, and you have this sense that you'll see them again. So I think Frank's right that 75% of Christians leave in college, but I would say that a good chunk of those will come back to Christianity in their late 20s, early 30s when they have children, and most of them, probably 80% of them will be female, and after they have kids. And I could be wrong about everything I just said. This is just my guess.
I don't want, and I know your parents don't want, you to call home one day and say, Mom, Dad, I don't believe in God anymore. Is that going to be you?
Look at that finger.
If it will be you,
Let's point at me.
You're going to be making an eternal mistake. You're also going to be adopting a new faith, which is...
Okay, remember how some people came in late and didn't see this? But I started this video saying, why is leaving Christianity bad? And I said the first reason is hell. And hang on, let me rewind that.
Is far an eternal mistake. If it will be you, you're...
So he's asking, if you leave Christianity, if that will be you...
You're going to be making an eternal mistake.
You're
also going to be adopting a new faith, which is far less reasonable.
This is what it's all about, folks. This is why Christian parents are crying when their Christian son or daughter leaves Christianity. It's an eternal mistake. So the whole idea of United States morality is going to collapse, or there's going to be more abortions and more sexual deviancies if people leave Christianity, that's there. But this is the big one, eternity. And he's right to say that. If I was a Christian, I would say the exact same thing. If there's no hell, there's no need for Jesus. This hell, heaven is what is at stake here. This is why, ultimately, you should be a Christian.
Whatever that is, the truth is that Jesus really is who he said he was. And that
we don't know what Jesus said, Frank. We have documents written, the Gospels, written a lifetime after, purporting, claiming to say what Jesus said. We don't know what Jesus said.
that ultimate meaning and purpose in life only comes through him.
There we go. Eternal salvation, ultimate meaning and purpose. These are why people believe. This is why Christians are Christians. That whole sense of, why should I even get up in the morning if Jesus isn't God and died for my sins? Meaning, purpose, death, eternal life. Until you find replacements for these emotional needs, why would anybody leave Christianity? Well, there is a way, and that is the cognitive dissonance builds up so much that it's more painful not to leave. I mean, it's just, and that's what happened to me. It's like, I just can't believe this anymore. This just not, I think when you're a Christian, your cognitive dissonance is like at, no, let me back up. When you're a conservative, fundamental Christian, your cognitive dissonance, if you're honest with yourself, it's like you're doubting, a lot of things don't make sense. It's like at 70, 80%. When you become a liberal Christian, who's just like a cultural thing, and you just, I just love the good things about religion, it drops down to maybe 40 or 50. But I think when you become an agnostic atheist, let me give the benefits here. That cognitive dissonance drops down to 5%, and here's why. Because you are comfortable with the uncertainty. You are now comfortable with saying, I don't know. You are comfortable saying, I'm humble about this. I'm open to the idea, but I need reasons to believe it, and I'm okay with saying, I don't know. And I tell you, it's such a freeing experience. I was born again. I'll use the language of the Christians. It is almost like a born again experience to leave religion. It's like a burden has been lifted. You no longer have to pretend. Now there's downsides. I grant you that. The downsides, community aspect. In fact, do I say this? I encouraged a Christian just the other day who was doubting to basically slow down and I told him not to leave Christianity, because I know this person a little, and I know it will be hard, very hard. And I want this person to take their time and really leave for the right reasons. In fact, another person, Rachel, who's in the chat right now, she told me she left Christianity partly because of me. I was not happy. I'm telling you the truth here. I'm not happy to see people leave their religion just because they watched a YouTube video or because whatever. Don't think I take any joy in people leaving a worldview. I don't. But what I do beg people and ask people to do is just have a little bit of humility and say, you know what? This could be wrong. And I don't know. It's okay to do that and say that. Anyhow, I was bored today. My whole morning was like wide open, but this evening is jam-packed, so I got to go now. But I thought I would, in my spare time, be productive and critique Frank. And Frank, if you ever listen to this, or if anybody ever shows you this, please come on my show. You're welcome to. I will ask you very basic questions. We'll have a real conversation. I'm going to ask you what you mentioned you had doubts. I want to know what your doubts are. Are you courageous enough, Frank Turek, to tell the world what you really doubt about Christianity? I would love to hear your doubts. Okay, folks, I sound like, what's that guy's name? O'Reilly. Oh my. Thanks for the rant. I'll read the little comments. Yeah, thanks, Shane. I had fun ranting. Thanks, Rachel. Dan, good to see you here. Life becomes more real with no pretend. Yes, Gordo, I agree. Good to see you here, Tim. Joe DePalato, is that how you say your name? Good to see you here. Mr. G. Chet. Hey, moderator's here. Good to see you, Chet. Chet, by the way, is my producer for the podcast. I have a podcast, by the way, PineCreek. So all this will eventually go to audio only. Yes, someone asked me, Joe DePalato, wait, does Doug actually believe in miracles? I believe miracles are possible. I'm open to that idea. I hope miracles are possible. I tell the story about my sister who's paralyzed from MS. I would love to see her healed. Wouldn't you? Have a great weekend. I promise I'm not going to put up any more content for a while because I've been putting up too much recently, so you're probably getting too many notifications. But have a great weekend, and maybe I'll have something for you early next week. Take care.